All right. Okay. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining our weekly technical console meeting. Today is March 25th. For today's agenda, which I sent out late last night, I'd like to go over some of the key takeaways from the last meeting and spend 10-15 minutes presenting some of the documentation layouts and new setup of the project of the repo in the GitHub for technical console that I created over this week. And then we really need to jump into the agenda item discussing the actual layout of the standards and specifications, and spend most of the time today putting together the strategy to approach the actual definition of those standards and start organizing around them. So, but first thing first, let me go ahead and show you what I have done based on our takeaways from the last meeting. There's a couple of questions that I have for the technical console in terms of the approach for documentation as well. So I created the technical console repo in Polywrap GitHub, made it public. Let me know if we want to turn it into a private at this point, but this is what I believe that that's what we discussed, that it's a public repo. And I started putting together the structure initially just with the README file and the area for the each meeting notes. The way that these files are being created are through a HackMD infrastructure where you can create the HackMD files and then you can set up the version control and connect them directly so you can post directly to the GitHub. The one thing that I've realized as I was working on this that may be a little bit challenging is that, unfortunately, HackMD is a lot more comprehensive. It has more features that it supports that maybe not, that doesn't sound like they're standardized markdown features that clearly are not supported by GitHub. So for example, you can even see here as an example some of the functionality such as being able to create nice areas of color and color-coded areas or table of content. None of that propagates and visible through a GitHub empty files. So like you see, info here did not get resolved. The table of content here does not get resolved. Embedded videos is another area that I think is going to be a little challenging. I created links, but like this screen, you can play the video right then and there from it, right from the note, where if I look at the same file here, this does not render. It just renders it as a tag. The link works, of course, but that's not the best way to represent something. So I wanted to ask you if you feel that this is still the right approach, and we want to keep all of the our notes in here the way I'm doing this right now, maybe with a link to the original, which is what I've been doing. So if you want to look at it here, that's fine, but I've been creating links to the original docs where you can now jump in and look at the actual HackMD version of that, where it's a little bit better formatting. Love to hear your thoughts on the way that this is presented in terms of just the organization of the files and organization of the content.
I just think it'll be a cool experiment, and we'll see if it'll work out.
So continue as this. And one of the things that we might want to consider, and I've been playing around, is a product called Notion. It's sort of equivalent to Confluence in a lot of ways, but has a lot more interesting tools for content. So if you guys want to take a look at that at some point, I'm happy to present some of the capabilities. It's not letting me jump out. But Notion.so is a great tool, and it seems to be fairly open and not expensive.
We also have a Eugene. We have a backlog item in the operations project to actually do this because I noticed the same thing that we haven't standardized on a set of tools for document sharing.
Hmm.
You know, we're using some combination of Google Docs, HackMD, GitHub, Discourse. You know, there's a bunch of different things, and so there's a I can link it into the meeting notes here. Uh, there's a backlog item for this, so we can. I think, like Jordan's saying, just carry on for now, and then if or when we decide to standardize on something, then we can cover that later.
That's fine. The only other thing is, of course, the hosting of the video files. There is a limitation on the number of, file size. Oh, there's a limitation on file size. I believe 10 megabytes, both for the HackMD um, and for the GitHub, so you can realistically only upload images there. I've been using the YouTube channel. I need to touch base with you, Roberta, to get access to the Polywrap YouTube channel. So far, I just used my own to upload this particular file, but I'm planning on moving it off my account onto the Polywrap account once I have access to it. All right, so the key takeaway. So this is just in terms of the structure, but I'll now wanted to just go through briefly the content of the documents that I've created. So let's just take a look at that really quick, and I'll open that up in actual original doc so you can see it a little better. So I created an overview section based on our discussion where we discussed what, the kind of a standard definition of what the technical console means and what are the key focus areas based on the feedback that I received. The key areas were identified as standards and features. Standards is, of course, being technical norms and specifications, and linked to the actual specifications repo that were already defined in here, Polywrap / specification. And features is being defined as the technical debates around very specific challenges or problems that being identified by different members of the DAO. Discussions around that may translate into some kind of a research project assigned to potentially a task force or some other individuals within the technical council or guests of the technical council to provide some direction, and then those directions may further translate into guidelines and standards definition within the context of the first bullet point. So I wanted for you to briefly take a look at this definition. Of course, this is all can change, but I wanted to make sure that we're aligned in terms of how it's being structured right now in the public repo. Any feedback on this? Any recommendations for the changes? Okay, let's continue. There's a roadmap link to the project plan, and there is a discussion of the governance. On the governance side, we identified 3 major roles: facilitator, member, and task force members. I think we were pretty clear about the fact that technical council membership is open to all Polywrap DAO members, both at individual or team level. But we also recognize the fact that some of the folks that are external to a Polywrap DAO may be invited to participate on specific, very pointed technical council discussions, and also may contribute to a particular task force formation, when the particular issue needs to be resolved. I think in terms of the questions that I had for the technical council coming out of those discussions, as I was organizing my notes, was a question around the chair role. I think it was also stated the chair and the facility road is not the same. So that opens up the question is, do we want to define the chair role, sort of the overall head for the console that may, you know, break certain jam logs and things like that. And of course, one of the other topics that came out was that we need to have some members of the console that are representative of core Polywrap projects such as Hub, CLI, Registry, Toolchain. And the question would be at that point, do we want to actually create a page where we name those individuals with explicit responsibilities, including a chair if we decide that the chair role is necessary. So I wanted to open that up for a discussion for a couple of minutes to determine the answers to those questions. And the one thing that I would also mention before we get into this discussion is that this also probably needs to be discussed within the context of council decisions. We made we made some comments during the last conversation that some of the council decisions may need to be ratified through a vote, both either through the council vote or even some of the key decision needs to be determined and turned into a proposal and be made available for the DAO for all the DAO members to vote for, even the ones that I don't necessarily join the council. The question that I have that wasn't clear to me out of last week's discussion is that who makes the decision on where a particular discussion points needs to be turned into a votable discussion point, right? Where do when a vote needs to take place? Is that going to be facilitator making that call? Is that going to be sort of ad hoc discussion, or is the new role of the chair, and this is why I'm kind of connecting the two together here, needs to make that decision. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. There's two set of questions related to governance that I wanted for us to address really quickly before we get into the actual standards discussion. What do you guys think?
I had some quick thoughts. So I think that one of the things we want to avoid is having a diffusion of responsibility. You know, if we don't have, let's say, for example, any clear leads defined for the different areas of the project, you know, some areas may potentially become, you know, hard to address, I suppose. And so I think that maybe in the short term, we could start, you know, just kind of as we are, just kind of meeting with, you know, an ad hoc group. But if we start to see that we have a diffusion of responsibilities and that we're not actually effectively producing what we need to produce, whether it be specifications or decisions or what have you, we, you know, get more specific and we say, okay, we need a representative from, you know, these product areas. So yeah, starting out just very simple, and then if we see ourselves not producing the way that we want, we can get a little bit more specific with who is responsible to actually take on these areas.
Okay, so we can take this out for now. We're keeping the roles as they are. Okay, makes sense.
Well, yeah, and I would also love to hear other people's opinions as well.
I do agree. I think our whole process doesn't need to be so detailed. We can evolve as we go and tackle problems that arise.
Everybody agrees on that?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
I'm going to be working on defining some additional roles as they need it. I think we're okay for now, but as the number of documentation tasks become more extensive, we might need some additional help here. So those are potential roles that may allow us to expand our throughput on the documentation and management of the technical console facilities. I think we're okay for now, but I'll keep you guys updated in terms of my proposal to expand those capabilities. And same thing then on on council decisions. It sounds like it's going to be an ad hoc decision of saying, all right, well, let's have a vote versus let's open it up to our greater vote for the DAO. Am I getting that correctly? We're just taking that up around.
Yeah, I think that we should start with just, soft consensus, feeling out what decisions need to be voted on, as an initial group. And then hopefully we can find some good lines in the sand to draw. And then potentially as we as a group figure this out together, we can assign some rules to it, and then maybe someone to, I suppose, enforce those rules. So whether that be like the chair or something like that, but yeah, starting off just with ourselves, trying to figure it out, and see if we can come up with any rules for the rules.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the DAO's attention is like a very valuable but scarce resource. So we shouldn't. I think at least that we shouldn't call for votes unless it's absolutely necessary. Because yeah, and the more proposals we put up for technical decision uh, ratification, the more they will start to get like lost in the threads. So it's something that we should do like not that often, I think.
And this isn't just a technical council issue, right? This could be like, I think you're pointing to a DAO issue in general, right? There's fatigue maybe of reviewing and voting on proposals. So this might be something we need to tackle in a larger context.
Right. Yeah, and especially like if you have to read through a forum post and you haven't been attending to the technical council meetings, so you have no context, like reading through the whole thing to have like a thoughtful vote is yeah, it's a bit tough, time consuming.
Yeah, and so like one of the ways that is typically used to address this fatigue is creating basically delegates. So it kind of brings us back to having those clearly defined, kind of like leaders of the technical council, um, so that way it doesn't have to kind of burden the whole DAO. But yeah, so I think that the two problems are very linked, and we will probably end up wanting to create some form of like leadership structure for the technical council to help with this problem.
So let's agree. Oops, let's agree on that. Um, do we? So let me ask you a question. Do we want to create like an members officers, right, or member leaders, with a well-defined responsibilities, with a list, with the names and the area responsibility, so we're very clear to separating the regular members from the leader members or core members, whatever the term we want to use.
Um, yeah, I have a gut feeling that it's a little too early, because it's like you don't want to do too much structure too soon. And so my gut is telling me that we should wait on this for at least like another couple weeks and try and produce something, like of value, before we start to formalize even more.
I can second that. I think there's enough structure already in place.
Yeah, and I really like how Ori puts it. Like you don't want to build and design this beautiful house and then nobody wants to live in it. Um, Basically, like you want to put the walls up as you need. So it's like, yeah, when you have a storm coming, like you'll put the drywall up. It's kind of I'm sure I butchered his analogy, but basically like build the structure as you need it. I think that is probably the best approach.
Okay. All right. So I'm adding that as a to-do to come back and reevaluate this after a couple of meetings and iterations that we take. We can come back and determine if this is necessary. Oh, that's what I did. Okay. All right. So moving down the line, there is an operations section with communications, meetings information, and then the history of the meetings. And wanted to just show you how, I intend to capture meeting notes. Here's the meeting notes for the previous session we had last week. As you can see here, there's a link to original document, which is just opened up the date, the agenda, the meeting recording, and then notes and takeaways out of those conversations. The notes could be, like I said, in this case, was a presentation that I linked to that we originally went through. So it's available at any time if you remember this presentation. And then takeaways, which was to create Polywrap console repo, which is done, define technical console overview, which is the page we just been going through, and then create a structure to record technical console meeting notes, which is what these pages are, as well as the page for the um, for today's meeting. Any questions, concerns about the structure? Anything that you would think we feel that not being captured here would like to add to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that this is really great. It creates like a really nice trail so that if people were super interested in the project and seeing how it was being developed and all the decisions we're making and stuff like that, I think that this would be a really easy structure for somebody on the internet to tap into. So I think that this is really, really useful.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, let's, I think that covers, let me just go back to the original. Here we are. So I think that covers, took a little bit more than 10 minutes, unfortunately, but it covers uh, the first part of it, which is going through some of the open questions and takeaways from the previous meeting. All right, and I think we're ready to jump into the technical standards and specification discussions, right? And if you remember from our last agenda, I think the main first question is to start sort of at the beginning, right? And just in very general term discuss what is the Polywrap standards, how we'd like to organize those, maybe categorize them a specific way. What are those different categories? Let's maybe start that discussion. And then culmination of the discussion is going to be the definition of the roadmap. So I almost want to jump back and forth between my notes and the roadmap so we can start adding those, those points into the roadmap directly. Roadmap being, of course, let me just open that up right away in the GitHub. Polywrap projects. Technical standard specifications project right here. So I'll just kind of jump between this screen and this screen as we continue these discussions. All right. What is the Polywrap standard?
Cool. So I actually just wrote a forum post about this last night, and I feel like this might be a good place to talk about it briefly. And the reason is because when thinking about the Polywrap project, I think that there is a lot that you could think about it. That you could think about. Is the hub a part of the standard? Is the registry a part of the standard? Like all of these different, tools and things that are a part of the ecosystem. And so if you go to the forum really quick, there's a post. If you go to technical discussions, it is the wrap protocol. And basically here, like my suggestion is that we separate Polywrap as a set of products from wrap, which is the underlying protocol that's being used. Similar to, let's say, like Postman and HTTP, or Docker and like the containerization standards that it's built on. And so I try to define what the wrap protocol is. It effectively comes down to, it meaning that this is like a random access protocol for WebAssembly. So it's, WebAssembly random access protocol. And what this means is that, we have, very specific features of our standards that allow you to do this. We have special URIs. We have special URI resolvers. A special storage layer that's built a part of the protocol for us to kind of fetch this from like cold storage, I guess you could say. And then, of course, different runtime functionalities for the WebAssembly modules to use. And so this has kind of been the framing that I've been looking at it through, is trying to really, really nail down, like, this is the core of Polywrap. It's the ability to like randomly access any WebAssembly module and run it on any device. Yeah, so I just wanted to briefly mention that this is a potential path we could go, but it is a bit experimental. Like, we haven't necessarily talked about it before, so I don't think that right now we need to kind of collectively say yes, this is 100% correct. Because I think that there's plenty of things we can pull out that are 100% correct right now, like, for example, the URI standard. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that this is a potential way of looking at the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, are there any initial thoughts on this, or yeah, or should we just move straight on to like the different parts that we do know about?
I'm just taking some notes here. So the
What do you mean by random access protocol?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, if you're familiar with the acronym RAM, RAM, it's Random Access Memory. This was like an innovation in, memory and storage, because you could, instantly access any section of memory, instead of having to like search and go to it directly, or search through a disk and go to it through its different sectors. And so similarly with WebAssembly, like, I think that there is kind of a similar innovation happening here, where previously, you had to bundle in all of your WebAssembly to your application. You had to know exactly, like, where you were getting it from, and add it to your app. And it was also, very tailor made to like your app itself. But instead here, we're creating a protocol where you can, at runtime, randomly access any WebAssembly module and run it inside your application. And so yeah, that's kind of the thought, is that yeah, you can randomly access any WebAssembly module on the web using the Polywrap client.
It seems like, Jordan, you're also making the distinction here between the protocol, what you're calling like the wrap protocol, and the wrap network, which the network being, this set of I don't know, services, or yeah, other other products that are helpful when when developing with wrap. But maybe it's useful to make for the purposes of the technical council, to make those distinct entities.
Yep, I would definitely agree with that. is having the wrap protocol and the wrap network, or yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to summarize it, but yeah, like pulling out those different network elements, yeah, into its own thing.
I mean,
So, oh sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking like an example of like maybe at some point, some organization wants to have a private registry. They still want to build wrappers that follow the protocol, but they don't necessarily their output doesn't necessarily live on the wider wrap network, for example.
Yeah, so maybe a way to say it is there's the wrap standard and the wrap protocol.
Yeah,
The protocol would be the network, and the standard would be like, yeah, the core standard.
I was just gonna mention that protocol is usually the name for the moving parts for the network, and standard is something you can just use the code and reuse the code for.
Okay. So how does that
I,
translate? Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Please
Sorry.
continue.
I think this is good to sort of flesh out what we mean when we talk about Polywrap in general and the different aspects of it, and differentiate between the thousands possibilities and different products that we have. But I do think that standards are things that emerge from over a certain period. It's something you usually don't just straight up define, but you see it in practice in a bunch of places, and then you decide to standardize something. So I think that's something that we will still flesh out as time goes on.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and that's been like a big reason of why we have been trying to build so many different kind of like validating use cases. So, for example, this is the reason why we want to build a second client. This is the reason why we've started building a bunch of different wrappers. Is to really validate that what we're building is reproducible and usable in all these different contexts. And then as we become more and more confident in that, then we can kind of become more and more confident in our standards. But yeah, I do think that it's a dance. It's a dance between defining the standard and using it in many different use cases, and then maybe revising the standard. Um, so yeah, I feel like we have been doing that pretty well, and I think that we're at a point where there are specific pieces of our project that we can pull out and start to define.
So what are those pieces? Maybe we can enumerate them and start putting together a list that will translate into a roadmap for documentation. Is that the
Yeah,
right way of thinking about it?
yeah. Let's move on to that, and kind of move away from this like semantic pedantic wrap um, acronym. But yeah, I think the first one is just the way in which we form and resolve polywrap URIs. So I think that that's like the first key piece. It's similar to saying like with HTTP, like the first piece that you would define is like the URI standard for HTTP. Um, yeah.
So URI standards is a good term to use for the category, right, of standards.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then like after that we have a URI resolution standard. So it's actually like an interface that all of the wrappers and plugins that act as resolvers implement. So we can very easily define that. So it's like the URI resolver standard. Um, and then after that, I would say that we have a whole section on client standards. So we have, the concept of plugins in the client. We have the concept of kind of like standard behavior for processing invocations. So I guess that a standard around like an invocation standard. We have a WebAssembly runtime standard, but that's like a whole nother section. And then we have
There's
And
cache.
like a message pack standard, right? Like a
yeah,
serialization standard, let's say.
a serialization standard, and then also a caching standard for sure. Yeah, a client
Caching
cache.
and URI resolution, which is a bit different, I think, from the URI resolver standard.
Yep, yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so caching and URI resolution. Yeah.
Also, is it important to
Wait,
mention
is that
read?
is that
Yeah, that would be two different bullet points. And those would be under the client.
like this?
Yeah,
Yep.
but separate them. Yeah,
Yeah.
2 different points: caching and then below it URI resolution.
And then also the invocation standard is underneath the client as well.
What about the interfaces and implementations?
Yeah, that's a great one.
Interfaces and what?
Implementations. And then there's the schema, the SDL.
Yeah, the SDL standard.
Is the reproducible build pipeline a standard? I think it should be.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the build process, also the package manifest files, or package manifest schemas.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on those. uh, so currently, as the build artifact, we have the schema, the fully built schema, but we have talked about having something like similar to an ABI or just a and that would be a standard.
Yeah, so I would actually rename SDL standard to schema standard, and then I would put underneath it SDL, type info. Yeah.
And do we have like any standards in regards to end-to-end testing, like a recipes or something like that?
I think we
It's like
should. Yeah.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah, because if we do, that'll allow us to do automated test harnesses so that we can make sure that, if we implement a different client, that'll work well, or if we implement a different WebAssembly runtime, that works well. So
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
I guess that this could be a section just called like maybe compliance testing or something like that, or like yeah, not sure, but
I think the cookbook itself or the recipes are like a specific part of it, and a lot of projects have those recipes.
right. So underneath compliance testing, we would have like um, recipe recipe tests. Um, you could also have tracing, and then yeah, yeah. There's like a whole bunch of research and development we would do there to basically create these like reproducible tests for all the different clients and stuff. Yeah.
I know we don't have too much defined about the client configuration, but we will in the future. Is that something that should be a separate part of the client? I mean, it will be.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think that we should add a bullet point on configuration underneath the client standard section.
And what was that bullet point again?
Just configuration.
Where are the plugins?
That's underneath. Oh, yeah. Let's add a bullet point underneath client called plugins.
And is that also a separate bullet point as well for the developer experience?
Um,
It's in different languages, so
yeah. Sorry, I had to sneeze. I think that there is a piece there which is like the unifying developer experience for all types of plugins, which would be the code generation. So like all types of plugins should be able to like generate types. So yeah, like yeah, I think that a way we could do this is like underneath the pipeline standard. We could have okay, we have build process, package manifest schemas, and then I think that yeah, we could just put plugin packages, or we could maybe put code generation. Actually, yeah, I think that code generation is probably a better one. Because that kind of is used for all the different types.
Like this?
Yeah. But yeah, like we're gonna have to look at each one of these and basically say like, is this something that is core to the whole thing, or is this just like a nice thing that we've added to the Polywrap tooling to the Polywrap CLI? But if somebody else was like building on the standard, like they may not care about this piece. Yeah, so we would just need to talk more about like yeah, if code generation is necessary. I think it would be for wrapper development, but not necessarily for plugin development. Yeah.
I think it will be better to list out as much as we can and then shorten the list.
Yep, definitely agree. Also underneath pipeline standard, I would put project types. So there's like application, plugin, wrapper, interface, like all these different project types. Yeah.
Is the CLI itself considered a standard, or does everything here come into the CLI?
Yeah, so I don't think that the CLI should become a standard, because I think that that's just something that could be implemented in many different ways, and it doesn't break compatibility if it is implemented in different ways. I think that that's the key thing.
True.
We should add a section on basically persistence maybe, or security standards. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's call it security standards, and then underneath it, we can have bullet points for hash verification. Um, we can also have a bullet point for locked dependencies. And then also for embedded dependencies or something like that.
What about permissions? Giving
Yeah,
permissions to wrappers.
that's a great one. Yep.
Okay, so that seems like a good start for standards outline. I will work on converting this into a roadmap. In the last 10 minutes of this meeting, what I'd like to ask is a couple of questions about next steps. Um, in more general terms, on how do we see the process of actually taking, let's say, one of the categories or one of the outline bullet points and start expanding it into a wider document and definitions. And then more explicitly, what should be the focus for next console session next week. So is the idea is that every console meeting we will pick one area, let's say whatever we decide in the previous meeting. Maybe there's some prep work that needs to be done ahead of time with preparation documentation to assign individual that can be reviewed. That is that the beginning of the task force, or we're going to try to collectively put that together during the call. What would be the right approach to start attacking each of these bullet points and creating a explicit the explicit outcomes of which is a document associated with that bullet.
Yeah, so I have. Oh, sorry, Yuri. Please go ahead.
Sure. Also keep in mind that defining the Polywrap standard or standards is just one responsibility of the council. The other is the features. So I'm not sure if it's something we should like make out half the time for or something, but we need to keep in mind. Keep that in mind. I know yesterday on the hub sync, I think there was a good topic for the technical council that could use the council's expertise, but I forgot what it was. So there are these types of features that different parts of the DAO or the toolchain, I guess, could use the council's expertise on.
Yeah, so maybe we could alternate. Maybe 1 week we focus heavily on like features and improving the things that we're doing, and then the next week, we have maybe review sessions for the standards work that people are doing. And I think that this will just kind of allow people to take time with writing these standards and also being able to understand better how it applies to like the ongoing developments. I don't know. Yeah, like maybe we just simply alternate.
That sounds good. I think thinking about it like it's 2 bi-weeklies gives both types of people or developers time to get something more fleshed out, specced out.
Right, and it's exactly that kind of dance that I was describing earlier, where it's like you want to define standards, but then also you want to look at use cases and see how they're being used. So I think that doing that dance in this meeting every week would be a good thing. Yeah.
Understand.
True. After the feature, you can have the next week that part come into the standard if necessary, or at least to discuss it. Yeah.
So then during the next technical console meeting, we can focus on similar type of questions on what are the different features and go through the outline for the feature section, kind of in the same way that we created standards outline for the standards outline, we can create features outline. Okay, that works. But since we're on a 2-week cycle for a particular feature, do we want to identify already at this point what is the next focus area for the standards topic, and are there any actions that we would like to take on or assign to different council members in preparation to those discussion points that will come up not next week but the following week, given 2 weeks time.
Yeah, so my thoughts on that, Eugene, is that one of the first questions we should ask is what part of this standard has the most dependencies? Because that will tell us what is effectively the most important thing to nail down first and to define properly.
Gotcha.
And so I think that maybe we could just leave an action item for people to maybe, we could take this list, post it to the forum, and ask the question of the developers in the community of what piece of this do you think has the most dependencies and is like the most important, that should be kind of standardized first, and it could be one or more options, but if I were to respond, I would say maybe the the pipeline and the URI standard, like those are the two important, like most important for me. So effectively we're trying to like source prioritization, and then from that we will basically drill in and be like, okay, this is the most important, let's get some people assigned to speccing this out more.
Gotcha. All right, I can definitely get that going, and then we'll have some feedback collected from those posts for our next discussion point that we can start creating some focus areas at that point. That makes sense. So the key takeaways are going to be, of course, I'll update, the roadmap based on these categories. We'll set up. We're moving toward this alternate council meeting between features and standards. Next council meeting is going to be focused on creating outline for the features, and at the same time, we'll start working together on prioritizing standard topics based on the dependency designator, and we'll be creating a post to collect everyone's feedback on that. Anything else in terms of takeaways and planning for the next council meeting? Or any other feedback now that we have 5 minutes left before the end of the meeting? Any other feedback in terms of the process, workflow, any other adjustments? In the last 5 minutes, let's talk a little bit about process, make sure that we're all aligned. And I capture all the recommendations for the council.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I thought that this was extremely useful. And I think that as we progress farther, I think that more and more of kind of like the deep insights will come outside of the meeting probably. And then the meeting will just basically kind of serve more of like a review purpose. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, I think that as we grow and we build more around this, we'll be doing more and more asynchronously, with different parties kind of taking it on in their own time and presenting it to the group.
I agree with that. Okay, any last thoughts or comments? All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. Another wonderful technical council meeting session. Thank you for everyone's participation. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.